I was staying near a small lake, far from everything. The place was quiet, too quiet. That night, the weather felt strange. No wind, none of the usual sounds. That caught my attention because there's almost always something making noise out there. I stepped outside for a moment because I noticed a strange smell. It wasn't trash or a dead animal. It was strong, damp, hard to explain. I thought it might be coming from the lake. I looked around with a regular flashlight, nothing powerful. I didn't see anything unusual. As I was about to go back inside, I heard a thud from the other side of the water. It sounded like something heavy falling, but I didn't see a splash. I waited. A few seconds passed. Then I heard another thud, closer to the shore. They weren't clear footsteps, and it didn't sound like someone walking normally. I turned off the flashlight for a while because it felt like drawing attention wasn't a good idea. From the darkness, I saw a shape standing among the trees. It wasn't moving. I can't say exactly what it looked like because there wasn't enough light, but it didn't have the shape of a common animal. It was tall, taller than it should have been, and it didn't hunch or move like a moose or a bear. What unsettled me the most was that it made no sound at all. None. It was just there. I went back inside and closed the door slowly. I wasn't panicking, but I wasn't calm either. I heard something move outside, very close to the wall. Not banging, not scratching, more like something leaning there for a moment and then moving away. It didn't last long, then total silence again. I barely slept. When dawn started to break, I went outside. There were no clear tracks, just strange marks in the soft ground, sunken areas without a defined shape. The smell was gone. The forest sounded normal again, as if nothing had happened. I never saw anything there again, but I also never stayed overnight in that place after that. I'm not saying it was a Sasquatch or a monster or anything like that. I only know it didn't behave like any animal I'm familiar with, and that it clearly didn't want to come any closer. That's all. Draw your own conclusions. I have a small ranch in a wooded area of Alaska. Nothing special, just land, trees, and a creek that cuts through part of the property. I've lived here for years, and I know well what moves around this place. Moose, bears, wolves, none of that surprises me anymore. This was different. It happened in late summer, toward the end of the day. I was outside, near the edge of the forest, checking a few things before nightfall. There was no wind, and the place was quiet, like it usually is. Then I noticed the animals had gone silent. I looked toward the woods without really thinking. That's when I saw them. First one appeared, big. It stepped out from between the trees without any hurry, walking straight, not trying to hide. It wasn't running, wasn't looking around. It was tall, broad, and moved with a strange confidence, like that place belonged to it. It was not a bear standing up. I can say that for sure. The shape of the shoulders and the way it walked didn't match anything I know. Behind it came another, a bit smaller, then two more. That's when I realized it wasn't just one. They were crossing the forest in a line, like they were following an invisible path. The biggest one led. The others followed at a steady distance. One of them was clearly smaller than the rest. Not an animal cub, something young. It moved awkwardly, slower, and at one point it stopped. The large one behind it stopped too. There were no sounds, no growls, no calls, no snapping branches, just gestures. The larger one turned its head slightly, as if looking at the smaller one, and waited. The young one kept walking, and the group moved on again. Everything was calm, organized. I stood there, not moving, not really thinking. I didn't feel like they had seen me, or maybe they had and just didn't care. They didn't look in my direction. They showed no fear, no curiosity. They simply passed through. It took them less than a minute to cross the visible part of the forest. When the last one disappeared between the trees, the silence lingered for a few more seconds. Then slowly, the place returned to normal. I didn't run to look for tracks. I didn't shout. I didn't take photos. I just stood there, trying to understand what I had just seen. The next day I checked the area. I found branches bent in a strange way. Since then, I sometimes notice movement along that same strip of forest. I get the feeling that something passes through there from time to time. They've never come near the house, never caused damage, never left clear signs. All I can say is that I saw a complete family cross my land, calm, unhidden, as if they had been using that same route for generations. And that, to me, is more unsettling than anything else. This happened while I was camping alone in southern Alaska. It's not a long or dramatic story, but it was enough that I've never forgotten it. I arrived early and set up my tent with plenty of daylight left. The spot was a small clearing surrounded by dense forest with a gentle slope leading north. I sat down to eat something and found myself watching the trees, more out of boredom than anything else. That's when I noticed movement between the trunks. At first, I thought it was a moose, but something didn't feel right. I grabbed my binoculars and focused. What I saw was walking upright, unhurried, with a long, steady stride. It didn't move like someone tired or like an alert animal. It moved as if it knew exactly where it was going. I kept watching and another one appeared behind it, then a third. They weren't walking together, but they kept the same line, like they were following a marked route. At that point, I thought they might be people, but they had no gear, no visible clothing, no backpacks, and they were large, larger than normal. As I watched, one of them stopped. It crouched briefly, picked something up from the ground, I don't know what, and tossed it aside. It wasn't a rough motion, more automatic, like someone clearing a branch from a path. That was what unsettled me the most, because it didn't look like an animal reaction. I decided not to move, not out of fear, but because it felt like any movement on my part would break something. I was in the open, but none of them looked in my direction. They passed through without hurrying, without changing their pace. When the last one was about to disappear, it slightly turned its head. I can't say it looked directly at me, but its posture changed, as if it had noticed something different in the surroundings. It stayed still for a couple of seconds, then continued on. Sometime later, after they were gone, I noticed something strange. A flock of birds suddenly burst out from the same area they had passed through, not at the same time as them, but afterward, as if the forest was reacting late. Nothing else happened that night, but the atmosphere felt different. Not dangerous, just occupied. I slept in short stretches. At one point, I heard distant footsteps on the slope, but I didn't look out. It didn't feel like a good idea. The next morning, I walked to the edge of the forest where I had seen them. I found branches arranged on the ground, not broken, as if someone had carefully cleared the way. The soil was disturbed in places, but there were no clear tracks. Nothing I could photograph and say, "This is it." I broke camp earlier than planned and left, not because I was scared, but because I felt that place wasn't as empty as I had thought. I'm not claiming they were Bigfoots, I have no proof, but they weren't normal animals and they weren't ordinary people either. They seemed to use that place regularly, like part of a route. And I was clearly in the middle of that path. I was on a long hike in Alaska in a lightly traveled area. It wasn't a marked or tourist trail, more like a route that a few people use from time to time. I had already been walking for several hours that day and stopped to rest on higher ground where I could see the valley below and a strip of forest at the bottom. I sat down, drank some water, and stared out without thinking about anything in particular. That's when I noticed movement near the trees. At first, I thought they were bears because they were large and moving in a rough way. It didn't surprise me much, so I just watched a little more closely. Then I realized something didn't add up. They weren't moving like normal animals. The two of them were standing, facing each other. They weren't on all fours, they were upright. Even from that distance, it was clear they were too tall to be people and too straight to be bears. One of them suddenly lunged forward and shoved the other. It wasn't a charge like an animal would make, it was more like the way two people push each other. The other reacted immediately and they locked up. They lost their balance and rolled a bit down a slope with bushes. I stayed completely still. I didn't think about recording or moving. I just watched, trying to understand what I was seeing. They got back up quickly. One threw a punch with its arm and the other stepped back. They weren't screaming or making strange sounds. I could hear branches snapping and the dull impact of bodies hitting the ground. Everything looked very physical, very direct. The size difference wasn't huge, but one clearly looked bigger. At one point, it choked the other hard and knocked it down onto its knees. The one that fell stayed there for a few seconds, leaning forward like it was catching its breath. The one still standing didn't keep attacking, it just stood there, breathing heavily, looking at the other. Then it turned around and started moving toward the forest. It didn't run, but it left quickly and without looking back. The one that had been on its knees took longer to stand up. When it didn't follow the other. It stayed still, looking in the direction where the first had disappeared, then moved off in a different direction, also toward the trees, but on the other side of the valley. The whole episode lasted about a minute, maybe a little more. When it was over, I realized I was shaking, not so much from fear, but from adrenaline. I had never seen anything like it and didn't know how to react. I waited a long time before moving. I didn't go down into the valley or approach the area where it happened. I didn't want to run into anything. I decided to change my route and head back the way I came, even though it meant a longer walk. For the rest of the hike, I didn't see anything else. The forest seemed normal, like always. Even so, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. It didn't seem like a random encounter or something caused by humans. It also didn't look like a fight between ordinary animals. I don't know if they were Bigfoots, Sasquatches, or whatever else. I'm not going to claim something like that with certainty. All I know is they didn't fit into any known animal category for me, and they moved in a way that was far too similar to us. The strangest part is thinking that it happened down there, in plain sight, and that if I hadn't been at that exact spot on the trail, I never would have known it happened at all.